last video, we learned about the Headmistress of Alfea and her right-hand fairy. But there are two other schools on the shores of this beautiful Solarian Bay. To the east, Red Fountain Military Academy, a mostly non-magical school where young adults learn how to better themselves in a vast assortment of different subjects and specialties. To the west, Cloud Tower. In contrast to the bright, uplifting energy of Alfea, the School of Witchcraft has a much moodier atmosphere instilled within its halls. And at the head of these institutions, two very powerful individuals. My name is Teddy, and this is my rewrite of Winx Club. Links to my shop, socials, and tip jar are nestled down in the description below, and thank you so much to anyone who checks them out. Saladin is one of those characters that I just didn't really know anything about. To be honest, I'm not sure there's much to learn about his original iteration. He's the headmaster of Red Fountain. He's in the Company of Light. He briefly dated Faragonda, apparently, and his nephew/grandson isn't very enthusiastic about attending the school he runs. And despite that school being non-magical and largely focused on molding its students into warriors, Saladin himself is a sorcerer. It is mentioned in the show that the students of Red Fountain can learn magic, but it isn't something we really ever see. Maybe they use it to communicate with the dragons they command? I'm not sure how old exactly Saladin is supposed to be, but since he knew Faragonda in his youth, he must be over 100 as well. Good old Winx Club and its wonderful timeline. I made my Faragonda 70 years old, and my Griffin, who we'll see in just a sec, 69 years old, but I think Saladin would actually be a bit older than them. I'm gonna say 80. In my rewrite, Saladin was the first of these three to begin as head of his respective school, taking over for his own grandfather while Faragonda and Griffin were still looking longingly into each other's eyes in their dorm room. He's also the only of the three to ever get married and have a kid, a daughter in fact, who would then marry a nice young lady from Linfea and go on to have Helia. At the time of the story, Saladin's wife has unfortunately passed. Since her passing, he's been making more of an effort to spend more time with the people he cares about. Just like Naboo, Saladin has a magical title, the Sorcerer of Endless Stars. I like to think that male magic users tend to get quite dramatic with their titles, compensating just a bit for how much less powerful they tend to be than other magic users, especially female ones and even more especially fairies. However, Saladin's magical source, being the stars, doesn't actually lend as well to fighting as you may think, and his primary use of his power is divination. Yes, he knows some light and heat-based spells, which we see in Helia's video as he had been taught them by Saladin. And I imagine there are some other good ones in his arsenal, but that has never really been the main focus of his magical studies. He uses his magic to read the stars. He tracks their movement and interprets the constellations they create, how the clouds cover them on certain nights, how a shooting star glows as it falls through the sky. He lays out theories and messages regarding his readings, prophecies both big and small. And though not all are 100% accurate, his many years of experience have allowed him to refine his skills greatly. When he was a young man, Saladin was a lot like Helia. He also didn't see himself taking over Red Fountain like his forefathers did. All he wanted to do was study the cosmos. Then one day when he was doing just that and diving deep into his work, he found himself unraveling a vision of great danger. A forecast of bloodshed and misery and worldwide destruction, and his life changed forever. It was a lot to grapple with at the time, only in his 20s and feeling as though he held the fate of all of Magix in his hands. He wasn't sure what to do at first, but after considering many different angles, Saladin felt that the best thing he could do was ensure that those who would need to face this threat would be prepared. He didn't even know when it would all go down, but he promised himself that he would continue to look for signs of its onset and progression for the rest of his life. For a while, he lived in a constant state of paranoia, and it wasn't until meeting his late wife that he was able to once again envision a future that wasn't plagued by bloodshed. Of course, it would be difficult to come to terms with the fact that he would simply have to wait, but it was necessary. He was gonna live a happy life in the meantime and enjoy the time he had with his loved ones. Now, in his old age, Saladin has begun to feel those old worries creeping back into his mind. So much preparing to fight against an ambiguous evil force, trying to learn more about it and find some kind of weakness. With each villain he fought and overcame, he thought, was that it? Was it over? And yet it never was. By now, he knew the time was finally drawing close. But would he still even be here when it came? Or was he simply meant to warn the next generation? Saladin loves his grandson and admires his passion for the world outside of Red Fountain, but he feels Helia will also have to take the path he did all of those decades ago and dedicate himself to the overseeing of the academy. That's why, at the time of the story, he suddenly put so much pressure on Helia to attend and begin training. The time for peace on Magix could come to a close any day now. Also, by modern day, Saladin is now the leader of the Company of Light. At this point, much of the running of the school is actually done by Codatorta, who is to Saladin as Griselda is to Farragonda, pretty much. But Saladin does not enjoy isolation. His seclusion is the result of tending to the fate of Magix as if it were a prized garden, while Farragonda happily obsesses over the past, indulging her curiosity. Saladin nervously obsesses over the future. His counsel is sought by nations far and wide, and he does his best to maintain peaceful relations between them. His guidance is probably the only reason King Arendor hasn't sunk his claws into any of the bordering kingdoms in the past 18 or so years. It is a lot to deal with, but seeing his school thrive is a great comfort. While, of course, him wearing blue makes sense alongside his title, I really like the way it connects him visually to the specialists. If you remember my Helia video, I made his second outfit blue as well. I did take the color inspo from one of his original outfits in the show, but it also displays the effect his time at Red Fountain has had on him, and how he's begun to feel more comfortable there. With Saladin wearing blue as well, Helia's outfit can also signify the depth that has developed in his relationship with his grandfather. The style of it also evokes the Japanese inspiration of Saladin's side of the family. They don't resemble each other incredibly strong, but there are similarities. One main one is their long hair. Though it has begun to thin, Saladin's hair was once thick and luxurious like Helia's in that same dark midnight blue tone. Both have high cheekbones, strong jawlines, and hooded eyes. And I think as Helia begins to reach his later years, he'll look in the mirror and finally see that resemblance for himself. Over time, he would come to not only highly respect his grandfather, but once again cherish their time together in the way he had as a little kid. I don't think Helia would end up taking over as the head of Red Fountain, but he would still pledge to uphold his grandfather's ultimate dream: peace. Saladin's staff is meant to be in the image of the mother dragon. It not only depicts the egg she is said to have cultivated Magix to care for, but also represents the future and hope. She holds within her mouth a small crystal ball, with which Saladin can look upon the stars and foresee the path he has gleaned from them. Saladin's prophecies come from the cosmos, the origin of the dragon herself, and if you look within his sleeves, you will see the aforementioned endless stars. This is to signify the strength of his magic and add a feeling of mystique to his design. And we would also see Saladin before Lord Darkar, if this was an actual show. So imagine knowing that the leader of the fabled Company of Light holds starfields within his sleeves, only to see that the first big villain the Winx will face bears such heavens upon his very skin. I'm pretty happy with how Saladin ended up looking. I think he feels like a man who's seen horrors and yet does his best to remain strong. Though he's a mighty sorcerer, he's also an old man who's loved and lost and wants to see the world improve before his time comes to leave it behind. I love the idea that by the time our story is over and the great evil he's feared for so long is defeated, all of the Winx and our specialists have taken to calling him some variation of Grandpa, and that he's able to attend their weddings and coronations and even meet a few great-grandkids. After a lifetime of stress, he can finally relax, treasured by the youth he so desperately wanted to save. The director of Cloud Tower is much less concerned with past and future, trying more so to focus on the present. When running a school for witches, taking it a day at a time is sometimes the best you can do. Griffin is very passionate about her school. Unlike her colleagues, she's quite active in the administration side of her duties. Being a witch on Magix can be mentally and emotionally tiring, but she knows how incredibly rewarding it is to truly live as yourself. Though others may fear and even resent their lifestyle, she works to ensure that within her walls, young witches are encouraged to defy such judgment. She wants her students to be confident and strong, to embrace themselves fully and live without shame. Though perhaps she does take it a bit too far sometimes. Her enduring rivalry with Faragonda, though now much more lighthearted between the two of them, has ingrained itself within Cloud Tower. Griffin is a lot softer than she wants others to believe, and has accidentally enabled her student body into embracing the reputation of witchcraft a little too much. There's a reason the Tricks became social powerhouses while Murdo was ostracized by her peers. Witches are incentivized to be competitive and antagonistic, and alongside that often comes a much less cautious atmosphere than that of Althea. Of the big three, Cloud Tower is absolutely the party school, and our three young witches meeting like that, fostering their bond in such an environment, who's to say how it affected their spiral towards villainy? Griffin had noticed them too, just not in the way she should have. She thought them incredibly promising students, and was eager to see the witches they would grow up to be. She took a particular interest in Icy. Though she started out so quiet and was a complete novice with her powers, Griffin saw how quickly she became one of the most influential witches of the student body. She pushed herself every day, going outside her comfort zone and gathering an increasingly more devoted following. She considered the possibility that Elysia may even be her successor. Little did the director know that this whole time she'd been working under the command of Lord Darkar, and not even a year later would commit her first murder. At least having to reach out to Faragonda upon the commencement of this coup would reignite their relationship. That's nice, I guess. Upon seeing that the Tricks had begun enacting violence against her school, declaring their allegiance to Darkar, Griffin's first instinct was to call Faragonda for help. And when Icy personally came to the director's office to take her as her prisoner, Griffin had complete faith in her old friend to save the day. I mentioned the last video that Griffin and Faragonda had first met when they themselves began attending Cloud Tower. They were roommates, both first-year students, but Griffin a year younger because of a late birthday, something Farah always teased her about. And knowing Faragonda, a woman who was achingly devoted to her own mind, things were surely rocky at times. And throughout their friendship, both did see other people every now and then, but they always came back to one another. The two never really defined what they had, though Griffin knew deep down her heart belonged to Farah entirely. Finding out about Faragonda's wings was a heavy blow to her heart. Maybe she could have handled dating a fairy, but this was a secret kept from her for years. And why? She told herself it would have been different if Faragonda had actually told her, trusted her to know. But instead, she only found out because Farah slipped up. The real kicker was how Farah reacted when Griffin found out. It seemed all of her time at Cloud Tower, her entire identity as a witch, was all some kind of experiment to her. She acted so cold about it all. Was Griffin ever anything more to her than a lab rat? Of course she was. But Faragonda was absolutely horrible at making it known. She was defensive, angry even, that she'd let herself get so worked up as to reveal her wings. She felt vulnerable, exposed, and Griffin couldn't help but wonder, what was so different about that time that Faragonda finally slipped after so long? Had every other time between them been meaningless to her? Needless to say, it was a very messy split, and with Griffin gone, Faragonda felt she had no reason to continue studying Cloud Tower, and ended up transferring to Althea, where she spent a few more years finalizing her fairy training before becoming headmistress. She and Griffin didn't talk again until both were head of their schools. But they've lived long lives. All of that went down so long ago, and there's other things to worry about now. They can move past it. They have to. With Griffin's design, I had a pretty clear idea of what kind of vibe I wanted, but getting there was a little tough. I do not like her design in the show. Yes, it is almost so bad it's good in a way, but to be honest, I think I would just prefer if it was good. First off, I was not going to make her green. I hate that she's the only person who seems to have a skin color like that. Just off. I'm assuming it's a reference to the Wicked Witch of the West, right? But they did it so subtly that it makes her look sick, practically zombified. And it wasn't like that when she was younger. It's such a strange choice, in my opinion. I tried to give her olive undertones as a way to rectify it in my mind. Second, I don't understand her hair. I think it's supposed to mimic the shape of a witch hat, like in that it's pointed at the top and wider where the brim would be, I guess. But it looks so goofy. It looks so goofy. Why? I kept her hair up, but I honestly don't really see my version of Griffin as being the kind of woman that would have her hair in such a meticulous style. Instead, she has it in a very low-effort bun, with her very layered haircut causing strands to escape haphazardly. This Griffin would also have purple hair in her youth, but it's much duller and grayer by now. Wait, actually, about young Griffin, I'm sure you're all familiar with the theory that she's related to Darcy in some way, based on how similar she looks to Griffin at her age. Long hair with lighter pieces in the front, big bright yellow eyes, and an aquiline nose. They both wear glasses. Darcy's witch form has the same gloves that older Griffin wears, and, of course, both like purple. Over the years, I've seen some fanworks that have Darcy as Griffin's niece, or even as her daughter, conceived during her time with Valtor and given up for adoption. Honestly, I've read so many Winx rewrites at this point that I can't remember which one has which detail. Drop them in the comments if you know which ones I'm talking about, please. I really like the idea of them being related somehow, and I love the idea that the well-regarded and accomplished head of Cloud Tower could be related to one of the school's disgraced founders. I think in this world, though, they just probably wouldn't know. It's part of Darcy's character that she's disconnected from her extended family and doesn't know anything about her ancestry. So if Griffin is related to her, I think neither of them would be aware of that, and it would likely be a bit more distant than the direct niece and aunt. And definitely not mother and daughter. Sorry. Griffin also doesn't have that personal connection with Valtor since he's been locked away for a long time in his crystalline prison. Anyways, I did still want there to be similarities in their design, kind of just as a reference to how much I like that theory to the original show. I mean, we don't ever see Darcy's parents. And actually, because of the ambiguity of their connection in this world, I honestly think I put more thought into it than I did with Helia and Saladin's connections, since we know straight up that they are direct family anyway. I of course gave Griffin the aquiline nose and yellow eyes that I mentioned before, as well as a similar skin tone to Darcy. However, because I have the lightened part of Darcy's hair as not actually being natural, I didn't give it to Griffin. Also, I don't want them to look too similar. A more subtle connection they have is actually their witch focuses. Darcy is the Witch of Illusions, and Griffin is the Witch of Flesh. I'll talk about that more in a bit, but essentially, they're body and mind. I did try to show this theme in her everyday outfit, since she probably wouldn't transform as much as, like, the Tricks do. I posted her sneak preview and asked you guys to guess what you thought her witch focus was, and some of you were really close. Someone even pointed out that her torn undershirt resembles the fascia that surrounds human muscles, which was intentional. And someone else connected the pearls on her necklace to white blood cells, which is really cool, but was not intentional. Yeah, that was a good one. And this one's pretty obvious, but her boots are meant to evoke a Frankenstein-like vibe of stitched together skin. I did give her pretty massive heels, huh? But she refuses to let them go since they bring her a little bit closer to standing eye level with Farragonda. Ah, yes, that's one more connection she has with Darcy, being another case of a witch having fallen in love with a fairy, only to end up brokenhearted after suddenly seeing those sparkling wings. I would want Griffin and Farragonda's reconnecting to feel very Bubbleen-esque. I think it's pretty clear they share similarities, at least on a surface level, but also in that they gradually come back to each other as they fight danger side by side, driven to protect the kids that look up to them. Then, eventually, they start to spend more time with each other without the looming threats, simply doing things because it's important to the other, and they know they can rely on that person for matters both grand and life-changing and seemingly trivial. Marceline and Bubblegum are immortal beings, but Griffin and Farragonda are not. The lifespans of those on Magix in this rewrite is only slightly longer than those on Earth, and these two have spent decades refusing to admit they miss each other. In that time, they've grown old, somehow together yet still so apart. They were both there to see Saladin's wedding, the raising of his daughter, the birth of his grandson, the loss of his wife. Kings and queens have come to power and fallen. Year after year, they cared less and less about the initial feud that drove them apart. But both were still too proud and too stubborn to reach out. You may notice that whereas Farragonda certainly looks like a 70-year-old woman, Griffin doesn't really seem only a year her junior. One of her powers is slowed aging, though it's only slightly. As she gets older, it certainly gets more noticeable. Her hair isn't quite as gray as Farragonda or Saladin, her wrinkles less pronounced, her skin not as delicate. She's also an excellent healer in general, though her magic may be a bit more invasive than Darcy's when it comes to that. She doesn't have that built-in pain management that comes with mind-based healing, and her spells often require direct physical contact to be the most potent, though on others, they're never quite as strong as on herself, where she can heal pretty much any injury she receives. Any physical injury, that is. I chose the word flesh for her very deliberately. There were a lot of similar things I could have chosen, but ultimately, I wanted something that I felt could reflect the more hedonistic and indulgent side of her, alongside connotations of things like violence, rebellion, pain. Though Griffin seems to be the edgiest of the headmasters, she's honestly the one closest to just chillin'. At the start of it all, at least. Where Farragonda manipulates and self-destructs, and Saladin isolates and spirals with worry, Griffin, for the most part, is just living her life. She runs her school well and is an active leader, but she really doesn't let it consume her life like the other two, which is ironic since they're really giving most of the work to their assistants. She goes on dates, she attends galas, still experiments with her magic, and truly enjoys being a witch. Though many people look down upon them, she's still a very highly regarded figure as the head of Cloud Tower. Up until the tricks really intensify the public's disdain for witches, and Griffin receives a lot of the blame for their coup. Work-life balance is great and all, but perhaps she was a bit too caught up in such pleasure-seeking behaviors that she didn't have quite as firm a grasp on her school as she thought she did. No, the truth is, there was likely very little that she could have actually done to predict 3 of her students were working for a maniacal freak of nature. Nevertheless, the incident would change something within her. After being taken to the dungeons by Icy and seeing those who stood against the tricks locked away beside her, it was like a primal instinct was ignited in her mind. The students and faculty of Cloud Tower are her family, and she must protect them. Their lives are infinitely valuable to her, and she would do anything to ensure their safety. This, combined with the guilt that everything had begun within her own hallways, would lead Griffin to losing almost any regard for her personal safety. In her mind, since she can heal herself indefinitely, she should be the one to take the blows. While she'd always been a bit scrappy, once she was out of that dungeon, she fought with everything she had, and with the many dangers on the horizon, she would never again lose that ferocity. I think it would be really nice to see more of the headmasters in this rewrite, which, God, yes, I would love to make into a comic one day if it was ever possibly feasible. But something I'd definitely like to see more is interaction between them. I always loved the moments when the Company of Light would be able to get together in the original show and do something separate from the Winx, as rare as that may have been. Like, imagine while Farragonda and Saladin strategize and plan, Griffin and Griselda are just off in the distance, sparring, going nuts. Huh. Does Farragonda have a type? Another thing I'd really like is more interaction between Griffin and Lucy after season 1, especially. I really wanted to give Lucy more of a role in the story, and if you remember her video like forever ago, I mentioned that I saw her becoming director of Cloud Tower one day after Griffin. There would be lots of moments between Faragonda and Murda after she transfers to Alfea, and how lovely would it be to have all 4 of them together, for Faragonda and Griffin to finally witness a healthy romance between a witch and a fairy. Oh gosh, anyways, for Griffin's witch outfit, I may have leaned a little heavy on the theme, and she kind of ended up very red. But I mean, it works, right? I knew I wanted her hair to be down, the reverse of Faragonda's hairstyles for her forms, and I really wanted her to have choppy layers, kind of like a wolf cut, I guess. I honestly think I could have went even harder with it. Since she's basically the head witch of this story, I thought it would be nice to incorporate some more blatant symbols within her look, especially since she isn't doing the trick special and putting her initial within her costume. I really love those clasping hand belts, and I thought a hand would work as a symbol for touch and be just sensual enough for her vibe. Within her look are, of course, some more little blood drops and a few alchemical symbols. On her belt, we have some nice yonic beads and the symbol for the body. It's also salt, apparently, which is super funny for a witch with a decades-long rivalry with her ex. There's also the alchemical symbol for life on her bracelets, and her witch makeup is meant to resemble the eye sockets of a skull, which is also why she has no eyebrows in this form. And that I thought it looked cool, but that's with everything, really. She has that gradient on her hands that signifies the use of witch magic that you'll see in all of the other witch forms I do. Oh, and I do want to mention, I ended up giving her some glitter on her dress and her capelet. Generally, I reserve adding glitter for fairy outfits. However, I thought it would be a good way to show that despite the school rivalries, Griffin doesn't actually have anything against fairies. She's gonna look at these teenage girls, and she's gonna see teenage girls. She's not gonna see, like, the enemy. Her rivalry is with Faragonda, not Faragonda's students. Plus, with Faragonda's wings and Saladin's stars, she just needed a little sparkle too. Considering how little we actually see of them in the original show, somehow these two have ended up becoming a couple of my favorite rewrites I've done so far. I'm sure you can tell by how long this video is. It's been really nice to dive into their psychology and explore the ideas around the magic I gave them. I love the dynamics they have, and with regards to the big 3, I think they really feel like colleagues, equals, while still all being so different. If you stuck around and listened to all my rambling, thank you so much. I appreciate you. If you liked this video, like this video. Subscribe and leave a comment, and feel free to check out those links in the description. Every bit of support means so very much. And now I have a wedding to save for. There will be more Winx coming soon, and maybe some other little fun things sprinkled in too. I hope to see you then, my friends. Bye! Griffin and Faragonda looking at Lucy and Murda, and all they can see is themselves. Only the height difference is reversed.